right, hello to any replayers. If you are replaying and joining that way, you can still participate. You can swipe right on Apple, up on Android, and you can click follow. You can hit on tap on the screen for hearts, and you can, of course, ask me questions on Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at joannazarach or Snapchat at joannazarach. And hi, thanks for the hearts. And if you are following me, you can also always catch the replays later. But it is so, hello. Thanks for everybody who's joining live. If you're new to me, my name is joannazarach. Who am I? Oh, hi, Gus. I'm still waiting for your question. I know you wanted to have some career advice, so I'm waiting for it. And Snapchat or Twitter. And my name is joannazarach. And who am I? I don't know. I don't do a lot of long introductions, but maybe just a brief one. So I'm I'm a scientist turned consultant turned a personal finance enthusiast, except I've always been a personal finance enthusiast for a very, very long time. At some point in life, like 5 or 6 years ago, I even considered going into financial advisory, looked at that industry, decided, it wasn't for me. I really wanted to focus on developing tools and practices to help people keep more of their money instead of just focusing kind of on the outcome. Once you acquire wealth, here's how you invest it. And again, I know that's where the money's at. But that's all right, because here, what we talk about is getting to financial independence. And hi, Roman, and financial freedom. I got to see some familiar faces on here. So, one of the things that I've been talking about is the 5 big money topics. Ooh, thank you for sharing on Twitter. Yes, if you think that somebody needs to hear this particular topic or any money matters, any money matters or money habits broadcast, please invite them. If you have friends, if you have family, and they're like, oh, I'm struggling with my money, and you're like, you know what, you should really do something about it. And if they're not going to listen to you, maybe they'll listen to me, a stranger. But I talk about all the things that I do talk about from experience, because I am a sucker for punishment, and I love the struggle of managing my own money. And I have been for a really, really long time. And sometimes I forget, like, I've learned how to do something, and sometimes I'm like, oh, just do that. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's actually hard. I'm like, yeah, welcome to the struggle. If it was easy, everybody would do it. But I share with you all my wisdom and all my knowledge, and I want to encourage you to take control of your money, to get your spending under control, pay off your credit card debts, start investing, and build wealth through investing. However you invest. So the big 5 that I talk about, the big 5 money, and we're going to talk about number 5 today, this Money Matters 101, is the big 5 things that really make a difference in wealth building. And this is the only 5 things that matter. Like, everything else is in the small money situation. The 5 big money things are income. Number 1 is income. If you don't have it, if you don't have a path to it, if you're not growing it, if in your industry or whatever you're doing, whatever you're pursuing, and you're like, there's a limit, it's a problem. You do have to generate income in order for you to build wealth. Like, if you're born into it, it's not as big of a deal. But if you don't have anything, like I came a first generation immigrant, you're gonna have to figure out how to get income. And I did that by switching professions. And it's worked out well. And then a second thing I did is I took my profession and made it into a professional services firm, and I started my own business. And that's worked out extremely well. So, income is number 1. Number 2 is taxation. You need to know about taxation, the implication it has on what you're earning, how much it's going to taxes, how you can, legally of course, take advantage of the tax code, takes advantage of the tax advantaged accounts, and how important it is to do that. And to do it consistently, to realize what taxation is, how it works, and how you can keep more of your money if you understand taxation. There's a lot of stuff in the tax code that's good. I mean, taxes is the biggest expense you'll have, even if you're not paying attention to it. For those of us that have are small business owners, we are writing those checks and estimated tax payments 4 times a year, and every time you write that check, you're like, damn, I wish it was smaller. And that's why taxation is our number 2 big money topic. Number 3 is investments. You will eventually become one of 2 things if you accumulate any type of wealth. You'll be either an investor or an employer. There really isn't much around it. And you might be investing not just in the stock market. You may be an investor in a business. You may be investing in whatever. But that's what happens when you have accumulated a bunch of wealth. You may hire a bunch of people to make those decisions for you, but nevertheless, that's what you end up being. So investment is something that you need to want to learn about. You need to want to learn about it. Now, you don't have to become an investment professional. You don't have to know how to trade stocks. I do not recommend it. What you need to understand is a little bit about the stock market. What are stocks? What are bonds? What are your investment vehicles that are available to you? And you need to start paying attention to it. You don't have to study it every day. You don't have to, you just need to say, you know what? I'm going to read an article. I'm going to read this. I'm going to ask a question, right? Ask a question. If you don't know how things work, ask someone a question. What the hell is a mutual fund? What's an index fund? What's an, exchange traded fund, ETF? What's an IRA? What's a 401k? How do I make investments work for me? This is critical. Number 3. Number 4 is big purchases. Big purchases in your life that can determine your ability to build and keep your wealth. They're super, super critical. When you're making that path, when you're pursuing the American dream, when you buy a car, you buy your education, you buy your big house, you buy, some of those things are depleting your ability to have financial freedom. So always be very thoughtful about the big purchases in your life. Be very, very thoughtful. Understand what you're buying, and not just in terms of the purchase, but the liabilities that come with it. And, not just in terms of like the mortgage, but actually taxation, maintenance, and all that stuff, house buying. But all the other stuff too, when you're buying education, when you're buying a private education for your children, for example, what are you buying? How much, what's it going to cost you in the long term? And what could you be doing with that money instead? Just a thought. So today we get to number 5. The number 5 thing that I really think it's kind of one of those undervalued things that's not talked about enough is risk. So why is it important, and what does it mean, and how do we mitigate it? So risk is really like a probability, some probability or threat that some damage, some injury, some liability, some loss, some negative event is going to happen to you. So in your wealth building, in your life, they're like, I call them like being hit by the bus. Like when things are going well, when all of a sudden you step in the street and you get hit by the bus. And it could be a proverbial bus, not just literal bus. So I want to talk about a few, like what are the most common risks, and kind of what do you need to start thinking about. And actually, I've actually thought of one as I was speaking. So what are the most common risks to you and I, individuals, right? So we're not talking about corporate risk, we're not talking about country risk, we're not talking like business sense necessarily. I just want you to start, yes, everyone, right? Like you're like, oh, that was all, it was all good and well when I was spending my salary and, and didn't have anything in the bank, and then I lost my job, right? So the number one thing when people, I think of risk and think of insurance, number one to me, because I have property in here, maybe not in the chronological order, but the thing that concerns me the most as a middle-aged person with dependents is loss of function. So what do I mean by loss of function? Loss of my own function, of course, death being the one that's the most devastating to your dependents and as well to yourself, clearly. So death is a certainty, but you're trying to avoid its likelihood through your working years. Disease is the second one, right? We all hear about people getting cancer, right? Like young people, old people, any type of disease, chronic disease, and then disability, right? It could be disability. So all of these things that are associated with loss of function. So when you're a breadwinner for your family, you really have to think about how you're going to mitigate that. And we're talking a little bit about life insurance, because really have good health insurance. That's part of your big purchases. But we'll talk about life insurance, because I have a strong stance on it of what you should have and what you shouldn't have. The other risk is when you kind of plan out your life and you're like, oh, this is my life, it's all grand, and then all of a sudden something changes, and I call it relationship loss. Why? Because it's kind of encompassing. So relationship loss is like a death of someone that you're dependent on, or your loved one. Also divorce. Like divorce happens to a lot of people. Now divorce it doesn't happen. Like divorce is something that a lot of people go through, or even like being estranged from someone. Maybe you have a big fight, and all of a sudden that person that you were relying on for support, or they were moving on, and then you're estranged. So think about relationship loss and how it will or can affect you. So it's not just your own loss of function. Now it's you losing a person in your life. Property loss. That's one of the things that we are faced at the earliest in our life because of some of our laws. Like if you have a car, most states require that you purchase a car insurance, right? Car insurance is really not to protect you mostly, but it's to protect the car loan people. Anyway, it's to protect you from the loss of your vehicle, but also the injury that you might do to someone, like the liability of it, right? So you also have, obviously, like if you were a homeowner, you purchase insurance because it's like a really large purchase. So large purchases, right, get insured. And then, but property loss is something you just have to think about. Because again, I'm not like a crazy person, but I'm always like, can I do something to mitigate it, right? Like, theft, right? Can you prevent theft? Can you make sure, you lock your doors or have an alarm system? Fire, right? Make sure you have working fire detectors, carbon, like things that are not just financial, but they're actions. So when you think about risks, you need to start thinking about what actions you can take to mitigate it, and none of them are financial products. And last, like if you're a renter, like I always recommend renter's insurance. Like I had renter's insurance since I was young. Why? Because it didn't cost a lot, and for me, like losing a bunch of stuff like would have been devastating when I was only making like 18 grand a year when I was a grad student, right? I couldn't afford to replace $5,000 worth of stuff. So renter's insurance. Income or job loss. Like one of the things that I think is crazy when people like expect their job to just be there, and like having seen layoffs and firings, and like even like maybe your spouse moves and you move with them, and like you don't replace your job right away. So it's a real thing, and I feel like that's something a risk you need to be aware of. And the last one, throwing in for fun, I call it Armageddon. So I sometimes use it as like because I'm like, oh, is this a risky investment? Blah 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 blah. What if the stock market, or even if I do have a lending club or economy, it's gonna melt down, right? And at some point, like I travel all the way down to like Armageddon, because I'm like, the thing is, if we have a large loss, like everyone's impacted, right? So you will be proportionally impacted to where you already are in the scheme of things. So yeah, like everyone felt the stock market crash, but unless you were like a retiree, or you had like something tied up in your like self value, and that you were relying on your 401k to like take loans out of it or something, like it was just it was like crap, but like it didn't really impact your from the market perspective. Now when it trickled down to jobs, right, that's when it really hit people. And then when it trickled down to the housing market, then that's when it really hit people, right? So something we can learn from that experience. But when it comes to Armageddon, one thing that I like to think about is that think of yourself and what skill you have beyond what you're like good at. Like I'm a consultant, and man, it's not going to help in the Armageddon. I always try to make sure I have other skill sets. So I'm a trained EMT. I did that a long time in college. I'm good with my, I've used every tool. Like I try to learn things even if I just do it once, because just in case there is Armageddon, The Walking Dead, whatever. That's like the final thing. But let's cover a little bit about mitigation. And so obviously insurance is a product that is sold to a lot of us as a way to mitigate risk. And some insurance is appropriate, and some may be not a good use of your money, right? So it's one of those things that you have to decide. And so I'll talk about what I really recommend and where I'm like, it's questionable. And most of it has to do with the price to value and the likelihood. So what is insurance really? It's actually a bet. Insurance is a bet between you and the insurance company about the likelihood that a negative loss or event will take place. And what do I mean by that? Like when you're young and they're like, they want to sell you term life insurance for the next 10 years, they're like, we're betting you're going to live. And they make their bets based on like your current health, and you're like where you like statistically, like what your background is. They test you tremendously. Like life insurance, if you apply for life insurance, one of the best health checkups you'll ever get. They test for everything. Why? Because there's money on the line. So I always recommend, thanks to the hearts. So here's when you get life insurance. Let's talk about life insurance. There's two main classes of life insurance: term life insurance, which some people refer to like saying as a renter's policy, and whole life insurance. I will 100% recommend to most people term life insurance. I have term life insurance. Why? Because whole life insurance eats up a whole lot of your cash flow. And it's really only good for people who are super wealthy and are looking for like a tax estate planning tool. For you and I, for most people, what term life insurance buys is basically covers your family, right, for the catastrophic loss of your life. And everyone with children, with young children, should have life insurance. Everyone whose spouse or sibling or parent depends on them in some way, and not just financial, like could be a caregiving capacity, should have some life insurance. Now, life insurance can be bought at like a fairly inexpensive price, right? Like even if you can just buy $100,000 worth of life insurance, like you should, because someone depends on it. Like make that like possibility not be devastating. It's already devastating emotionally, right? But don't make it financially devastating if for some reason you experience loss of life. So I recommend term life insurance. I know there's some formulas like, 10 times your earning or, X times your earnings. I'm sure I'm overinsured for life insurance, but it's really important for me because I want my children to be provided for, and I don't want my spouse to struggle. And the same thing when we were having kids, I was like, you're getting insurance. So term life insurance, I recommend it for people, especially when you have children or other dependents. Obviously, your standard insurances, automobile, homeowners, renter. Disability and long-term care, I have mixed feelings on those. Those are kind of funny products that have been out, and disability insurance is super expensive. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently, and she's like, well, we should really have disability insurance. I was like, okay, how much is it? It's really expensive. I said, well, you're better off, in my view, investing that money and then coming up with a mitigation plan. I said, what would you really do, right? Like if you had a catastrophic injury that led you to a disability, man, we're moving in with some family. There is no way that we can handle the day-to-day with one of us being disabled, like to the point where we cannot not just work, but take care of ourselves. And so that's when you go and say, what is my immediate, who can take care of me? Like, is there a possibility of me moving in with someone? Is there a possibility of somebody moving with me? So mitigation isn't always about purchasing something. Purchase it if you're like, look around, you're like, everyone is far away, like they can't afford it, they can't take the time, there is no one has a big enough house, etc. Similar with long-term care, long-term care is an insurance that is supposed to pay for the care an elderly person or disabled person would need over long term. It basically pays for someone to come to your house and help you with your day-to-day stuff because you're no longer able to, right? And so you may look into it, especially if you're elderly and you don't have kids. You may want long-term care insurance because it's a quality of life issue. So, and again, it's like, what's the priority? Thank you for the hearts. What's the priority versus like the other expenses? So again, insurance, and that's why it's number 5. It's like, it should be the number, and it shouldn't be like the thing you take care of after you do all the other 4. But in terms of like cash flow, like really get all your other shit under control first, right? Get your credit under control, get your investments going. Yeah, right. Like when you're older, right, and your kids don't like you. So, like, would I recommend my parents buy long-term care insurance? I don't know. Like, they don't know. They know I'm not coming to take care of them. But my brother lives with them, so I fully expect that, like, for the free room and board that he's getting, he's a perfectly capable person, that he should be doing it. And then my sister thinks that, like, he's not capable of this, so she's gonna have to do it. And I'm like, yeah, you all find it amongst yourselves. You need money? I'll write a check. Insurance. Okay, so life, this is a long-term care. Yeah, so 50, right? So I haven't really looked into it, but also ask, like, if you have elderly people in your life, you need to start having those conversations with people, like, hey, do you have life insurance? Do you have, like, not to be greedy or crazy, but just like start finding out, like long-term care, right? Like, what if something happens? I know that a lot of people my age are now taking care of their elderly parents and with long-term problems. And it's something that you want to not just it's not just an emotional burden, but it can be a very big financial burden. Okay. One thing that I recommend is, over time, you want to shift to what I call being self-insured, right? What's self-insured? It's a term that some companies use, and I like to, run my household like a company, like a corporation. So one of the things that I ask myself, am I self-insured? Like, can my net worth or can my wealth, handle this shock, right? So, my husband's organization, they were going through layoffs, and he's like, "Oh, I'm afraid of," I'm like, don't worry about it, because our finances are built in such a way that we can take a person not working, right? Like a layoff shock, where we are covered. But if you're not, or healthcare, like even healthcare, we have health insurance, but all the things associated with, a bad spell of healthcare, because we have little kids. If one person's in the hospital and the other one's trying to advocate for them, someone has to take care of the children, and it ain't free. Sometimes a grandma can come. So we talked about health insurance. Everyone should have health insurance. It's just to what degree. We are actually going to talk about health spending and healthcare accounts on Friday. Friday Money Matters at 5 p.m. I'm going to cover like FSAs, HSAs, and just health insurance in general. I don't think we talk enough about, well, I don't think I'm going to talk about any money topics, but health insurance and some of those advantaged accounts. So that's really the goal of today. It is, right? Like, and it's, don't even get me started. We'll probably talk a little bit about on Friday on the structural way in which we've kind of got to the point where we are, where it's so intransparent. You don't actually know how much things cost. You don't know what you're paying, the rates. Well, anyway, like I said, don't get me started. And having had the opportunity to work at one point in my time on an analysis for a full state for Medicaid spending and how much money gets spent on drugs, all kinds of drugs and categories that you wouldn't think. You're like, really? That's the biggest spender? I can share some of that too. But healthcare, right? Healthcare is expensive. That's why I said you've got to think of it as big purchase. You've got to include in your budget. You've got to mitigate against it, because if you do have a health injury, right? If you do have a health issue, and you're finding yourself not being able to work and being able to afford for the medical care, you're really in a bad financial situation, right? We know, like from statistics, if you read any of the articles about it, that medical bills are one of the leading reasons why people go into bankruptcy, right? And it's that it's just because if you can't absorb any financial shocks, then you're in deep, right? And this is why risk, right? The risk of having a medical issue, the risk of divorce, divorce puts people in bankruptcy, because all of a sudden, you adapted your life to, maybe if you're two incomes, right, one household, but instead of yeah, you can, right? You need to have that, right? And you need to mitigate it. Yeah, I think, well, you could think of it as a percentage of income, but also that's why I talk about wealth building and creating the freeing up the cash to make it into investments, because you want to start building that cushion. It's not just a financial cushion. Sometimes it's also psychological cushion, on what can you do, right? What steps can you do as a percentage of your income? I mean, I think risk mitigation, I think it's more what your assets are and what's your liabilities, and that's where you should apply risk. So you should protect your assets, right? Whether it's your you own a house, a car, own a business, right? I have a bunch of business insurance as well. And I think it's money well spent. I mean, it's I'm hoping to never get sued, but just in case, I don't want my family to be liable for any business decisions that I make or any business dealings that I have, right? So protecting that. So if you are a business owner, you also have to think about those additional things. I have general liability and professional liability because I consult, right? So I want the errors and omissions. I give advice to big corporations that take me up on it, and I'm always like, oh crap, I better be right. So I always double check. So I don't know that there is a formula of percentage of income for your risk. I think it's more, think of your assets and then think of your liabilities. So liabilities are the things that you owe, right? What's left behind. And then again, thinking of your children as liabilities is a little bit crass, but that you created a dependency, right? So think of liabilities / dependencies and think, what will it take, right? And so $1 million of life insurance, I think it depends on your age, right? But if you're super young, it's probably $500 a year. If you're a little bit older, it's probably $1,000. If you're pushing 40s, 50s, it might be $2,000, and it depends on your health too and the term, right? If you're only buying a 10-year term policy, the insurance company's we bet you're not gonna die, so it's cheaper. Yeah, it's a general balance, and what do you need to cover? So if you were doing I'd probably need to develop a risk assessment, right?
Yeah, that's right. Look at you. You're exactly right. You do want to look at what you need and what is the ongoing thing, right? So, but the way I thought about it, as like my children were real little, right? So, and they still are, but like before they were born, I was like, I can take a 20-year. I think I have a 30-year term because I got it when I was super young. When you're super young, like they're like, oh, 30 years, we'll give it to you for like extra $10 instead of the 20. So I think I have a 30-year. I think I have a 30-year policy. I think my husband doesn't have as good of a policy. Why? Because he's older, he's a man, and he's not as good of health as me, right? And so like trying to get him to the gym is, it's a constant battle. Whereas I go to the gym every day, and I wasn't always doing it, right? 3 years ago, I decided, crap, I got to invest in my health, and I got to go to the gym, and it's become a big priority, and I shifted a lot of things around it. But yeah, look at the outcome of that risk loss, like play it out, right? Like, and I mean, I know it's like it can seem very morbid, right? But like these are the stories that happen. I'm always like a little upset when someone dies unexpectedly and people are doing fundraising for the funeral costs, like $8,000 to $10,000, and makes me really sad. Like it's not just sad for the loss of life, but like like this family doesn't have enough money for that. Like have enough, right? And just put it aside, right? Or be the person in your family where you could like step in. It's not my brother and sister don't have money, right? And so like, but they know like I can't just give them money because they don't know what to do with it. But like they're taken care of, right? They would be taken care of. But it always does. It always makes. And if a child passes away and they have no funeral expense, it's just these things that are so sad for me. Where I'm like, I really like, I'd be so saddened if that's on top of the emotional stuff, right? It's so unexpected, and it's like, there's car accidents, there's plane accidents. I used to travel a lot, right? So every time I got on a plane, I'm like, thank God I have life insurance just because, like, in the unlikely event and this plane crashes, and in my car, I'm an extra careful driver because I'm just so very conscious of it, right? But it happens. It happens, right? Like accidents happen, disease happens, and just not that you need to be prepared for it, but like play through what happens, right? So like even if I fall ill now, I have this term life insurance. It's locked up. I'm gonna be paying that premium through whatever health issue I have, just in case, because you just don't want to add to all the emotional trauma that everybody goes around you. So yeah, I know life insurance is a lot of the thing, but to me it's like the easiest thing to fix and the easiest things to calculate. All the other stuff is like kind of hard, but yeah, look at your situation, examine what would happen if, and play out the losses, right? But you need to build enough capacity in your financial plan to pay for those things, right? That's why you really just need to like pay attention to the other four things, because I really want you guys to have a bigger buffer. It's all about having a bigger buffer and thinking about keeping more of that money, like from the very beginning. And the next $1,000, keep it, right? Like try to figure it out. And if you're already kind of in that paycheck to paycheck mode, really sit down and think about hard how you break the cycle, break the stress cycle, right? And then start taking advantage of some of those things and say, you know what? I know it feels like we're so crunched, so I never feel like I have enough money to contribute to an IRA. But try and get to that point, because it'll just start shifting your thinking a little by little. And that's why risk is also one of those things where if you mitigate against it, then it'll help out if you keep that money to mitigate against it. And I'll say, divorce does, like, if I map out my net worth, like it's going really well. I got divorced is really a low point, and then, like, I got remarried and I rebuilt my career, but like because there's a lot of emotional stuff, and mine was easy. Like, my ex-husband and I are on good terms. We didn't have any kids. We didn't have to split anything. I had a couple property things to take care of, but when things are emotionally devastating, don't add the financial part to it, because that's so hard. So try to mitigate at least what I can control. You can't control your emotions, but you should be able to control your mind. So anyway, that's the spiel for today about risk, is for you to start thinking about it, think the categories of risk, and then start making a plan for it. And again, doesn't always have to be financial insurance for it. but make a mitigation plan. Say, how would I deal with this instead of avoiding it and hoping for the best? Just have a plan. Sometimes it's a mental plan. Sometimes you just write it down. Sometimes you look at your bank account and you say, I can sustain it, sustain the shocks. And it'll just help you in that, like in wealth building, right? Because it's all about the wealth. If you are interested in that, that's going to be a big component of it for you. It's that fifth big thing, that risk, the unpredictable thing, the unexpected. When you're like, woohoo, I have a big plan. I'm going to be working in this job for the next 20 years. All of a sudden, you're like, you have an injury or something happens, right? It just derails your plans. So in wealth building, always think about the risks and then try to mitigate them. And then it starts changing your behavior when you start thinking about it. So just thinking about it might change your day-to-day behavior. The 5 categories. Oh, right. The 5 big money categories I always talk about. Or were you talking about the categories of risk? Yeah. Oh yeah, hi, good to see you on here. Yeah, I talk about risk because it writes out our 5 income, taxation, investments, big purchases, and risk. It rounds out the five things of big money. We're going to dive deep into healthcare costs on Friday at 5 on Money Matters, and healthcare accounts and all that, and like how you need to think about healthcare over time. Oh, the risk ones. Yes, loss of function. The loss of function, so death, disease, disability, relationship loss, death, divorce, or estrangement even from people you rely on, property loss, theft, fire, flooding loss, income or job loss, which is like layoffs or firing, or even when one spouse moves and the other one doesn't get a job right away. And then the last one, just for fun, Armageddon, just like think about when the total economic meltdown or loss of stability or war or, The Walking Dead happened. Like, what would you do? I mean, like, you don't have to get crazy. I mean, they have like a reality show about people who get crazy about it. But just like kind of think about it, like, what would you do? Like, do you have a place to go? Do you have a plan? Like they talk about having an emergency plan. Do you have a skill set that's useful? And if you don't, acquire it, right? Like I said, take some classes. Like everyone should be CPR, like no CPR, like I can do field surgery just because, I'm handy with the scissors, use power tools, fire, I'm not pro-gun, but know how to fire a weapon. I don't know, like things like that. Because, I don't know, it's happened in our lifetimes or in our parents' lifetimes. And, coming from Poland, which is a little bit more, let's say, recent in terms of like actual war history, like my grandma lived through the war. I don't know. I just think about that, like have a skill set. So those are the 5. So thank you everyone who joined. And yeah, thanks. I like seeing the familiar faces on here, and my frequent. And you know what? I got Full Scope to work. Full Scope. If you're a Periscoper, fullscope.tv is a links up to your Periscope account and does all these statistics. Fire weapons. I don't know. When I was in college, I took a gun class. It was supervised, and they got us to fire different weapons and shoot a rifle and all that. Yeah, lots of interesting things about me you may not know. But anyway, fullscope.tv. I got it to work for my thing, so now I can see who the most people that are engaged and giving me hearts, and so I really love all the engagement, and it just makes me happy to see some of the faces that are on my top lists on here. I know, Gus, you're on one of the top lists for participation and joining my scopes. So if you're a Periscoper and you want to use that, I would highly recommend it. Fullscope.tv. It's a free product right now because it's in like early stages, and you can analyze your Periscopes. So see you guys tomorrow. I'll be on at 10 a.m. for Money Habits as always, and Money Matters on Friday will be at 5 p.m. Thanks for all the hearts, and I will be covering healthcare costs, because I know a lot. Yeah, and I know like 5 people are driving, and I'm like, well, it's 6 in Eastern time, and you're trying to work the global angle and the U.S. angle. But thank you for joining when you can. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I just put Periscope on and I'm listening to it, even if I can't participate with the screen if I'm driving. So plus the reception. So thanks again, and take a moment. Take a moment to think about risk and make a little plan. And you don't have to do it all at once. Yeah, it's because it can really devastate your financial well-being, and definitely if you're trying to wealth build, it can really put you quickly off the path, you and your family. So okay.